The secure phone buzzed on the nightstand long before dawn, its vibration a low growl that cut through the silence of Nellis Air Force Base housing. Rachel Carter reached for it with a soldier's instinct, already knowing that nothing good arrived through that line. The voice on the other end was clipped, official, the kind of tone she had heard too many times in briefing rooms. Omega-7, an Arctic research station, had gone dark. A mercenary assault was suspected. 6 scientists were trapped inside. Her sister Lisa was among them. Command had made its decision. The phrase fell with the weight of a verdict: acceptable losses. Rachel sat in the dark for a long moment, the words repeating in her mind until they lost all meaning. Acceptable losses. How easily they said it, as though her sister's life could be balanced against paperwork and policy. She stared at the phone, fingers clenched, and felt anger rise sharp and cold. To obey was to do nothing. To defy was the only path left. She moved quickly, each step driven by clarity. At her desk, she powered up her tablet, the screen glowing against her face as code spilled across it. She hacked into the base roster, shifting security coverage so that her absence would go unnoticed for just long enough. It was dangerous, reckless, but precision kept the system blind. Once the last overwrite confirmed, she slid the tablet into her bag. The same device carried a different kind of weapon, a virus she had written herself, designed to sever tracking systems inside the F-35. If the jet believed itself unobserved, then the world might never know she had taken it. In the hangar, the fighter waited, lines sleek under harsh fluorescent light. She moved like a shadow, every glance timed with the patrols she had already rerouted. The canopy lifted with a hiss, the cockpit glowing with dormant power. She plugged the tablet into the port beneath the seat, watched the virus crawl into the system, and smiled without warmth as the tracking blinked red once, then fell silent. Rachel strapped herself in, the harness tight against her chest, and for an instant her thoughts flickered away from procedure and back to Lisa, her sister laughing in the desert sun, sleeves rolled to her elbows, never afraid to tease her for being too rigid. The bond had survived years of distance, of deployments, of silence forced by duty. And now that bond was the reason she could not accept the verdict of men who had never met her. She whispered the words once more, this time not as resignation, but as defiance. Acceptable losses. Not today. Not Lisa. The canopy sealed shut. Engines roared to life, and Rachel Carter set herself on the path that would change everything. The stolen F-35 cut into the Arctic storm like a blade swallowed by a living beast. Wind slammed against its wings, lightning split the clouds into jagged scars of light, and turbulence shook the cockpit so violently that Captain Rachel Carter's teeth rattled. Warning lights pulsed across her instrument panel, blinking in rapid succession hydraulics under strain. Navigation degraded, engine temperature climbing. Ice crawled across the canopy, fractals of frost racing to blind her view. It felt as if the storm itself had risen to drag her back. Her radio spat with static, but the words cut through with ruthless clarity. Nellis control to rogue aircraft. Power down and return. This is your last warning. Another voice intruded, accented and cold. American fighter, you are violating Russian airspace. Divert or be destroyed. The voices demanded obedience, each side claiming authority. But obedience was the one thing she could no longer give. To obey meant abandoning Lisa and the scientists at Omega-7. To obey meant surrendering them to die. Her radar lit with hostile signatures. 2 Russian Su-35s closed fast from the east, sleek predators cutting through the turbulence as if the storm belonged to them. A missile warning shrieked across her console. Rachel pulled the stick hard, the jet lurching into a desperate climb. The G-forces slammed into her body, blood draining from her head, her vision tunneled, black creeping in at the edges. She forced a breath through clenched teeth, fighting to keep consciousness as the missile streaked past, detonating close enough to pepper her wing with shrapnel. The impact rattled the frame, sending vibrations through her bones. Another lock. Another scream from the warning system. She threw the fighter into a roll, cutting lower into the storm where lightning flared like the claws of some furious animal. The jet shuddered, every joint in its body protesting the strain. Warning lights multiplied until the cockpit looked like a bleeding wound. The storm pressed harder, alive, relentless, pushing her toward collapse. Her grip on the stick tightened until her knuckles whitened. The fragile line between control and disaster thinned to nothing. Every correction felt less like flying and more like surviving one heartbeat at a time. She whispered her sister's name, a tether that kept her mind clear when the storm tried to smother her. Lisa was waiting. Lisa was the reason defiance mattered. Rachel broke through the last wall of cloud with a gasp. The Arctic sun poured across the horizon, golden light washing the frozen landscape below. For a fleeting moment, the storm fell away, leaving silence and brilliance. Beyond the glittering white, she saw smoke curling into the sky. Buildings dotted the plateau, scarred and small against the endless ice. Omega-7. The research station still stood. The storm had tried to claim her. The Russians had tried to drive her back, but defiance had carried her through. Obedience would have meant death. Survival had demanded something else entirely. The Arctic sun gleamed blindingly against the ice, but the clarity lasted only seconds before smoke pulled Rachel Carter back to reality. Omega-7 sprawled across a plateau below her, its white buildings scarred by rising black plumes. As she descended through the frozen air, the truth sharpened. Military trucks, not research vehicles, ringed the station. Figures in dark gear moved with coordinated precision, weapons ready, cutting through the blast doors of the laboratory. This wasn't chaos. It was theft. Her radio cracked with static. Then a trembling voice. "Sarah, is that you? This is Lisa." The desperation cut through the interference. "They're inside. We barricaded the containment chamber, but they're breaching. They want the sample. Please." The transmission dissolved into static, but the words were enough. Her sister was alive, but minutes away from being overrun. Rachel's hands moved to armament controls, every hesitation stripped away. The F-35's targeting system painted the mercenary trucks below. She thought once of her training, the endless directives against engaging without authorization. Then she thought of Lisa. Sometimes survival demanded broken rules. The cannon roared. 25mm shells tore into vehicles, splitting metal like paper. Explosions flowered across the perimeter, fireballs staining the pristine white landscape. Mercenaries scattered, some diving for cover, others fleeing toward the tree line. Rachel swung into another pass, releasing precision-guided munitions that struck with surgical accuracy. Escape routes shattered, communication rigs demolished. Each strike closed the mercenaries' options until all that remained was panic. The blast doors still smoked from cutting charges, sparks spraying as the mercenaries worked, but her assault forced them back. She circled, scanning for survivors, and saw figures retreating under the rising smoke. Trucks burned, black columns twisting into the sky, the storm clouds above absorbing the evidence of her defiance. Then, her cockpit screamed. Fuel warning light pulsing red, damage from the earlier missile leaking faster than she could calculate. She had perhaps 10 minutes of flight left, barely enough for a single landing attempt. Salvation or doom rested on ice. Rachel lined up with the station's emergency runway. Little more than frozen ground scraped flat. The F-35 hit hard, the impact shuddering up through her spine as spiderweb cracks spread across the ice. Engines whined down, the aircraft trembling as if exhausted. She popped the canopy, Arctic air blasting in at 40 below. Through the haze of smoke and snow, figures emerged. Lisa ran at the front, face pale, eyes wide with relief and fear. Behind her, Scientists clutched emergency packs, their breath turning to vapor in the brutal cold. One man held something tighter than life itself, a reinforced containment case. Dr. Marcus Webb, project leader, carried humanity's knife-edge future against his chest. Lisa reached the fighter, shouting above the wind. "The system's failing. We've got maybe 20 minutes before airborne release." Rachel looked at the containment case, at the black smoke curling skyward, and at the mercenaries retreating into the ice. Thin ice, she thought, between salvation and doom, and she had chosen to stand on it. The F-35 clawed into the Arctic sky, engines straining under weight it had never been designed to bear. 7 passengers pressed against the bulkhead, their breaths frosting in the thin air. Dr. Marcus Webb clutched the reinforced containment case, his face pale as a sharp crack split across its surface. Rachel Carter's eyes flicked from warning lights to the fractured shell, knowing one mistake could turn the jet into the spark of extinction. Radar shrieked with fresh locks. American Raptors closed from the south. Russian flankers surged from the north. Both sides fired. Contrails of converging missiles streaked the sky, death racing from opposite directions. Rachel keyed the emergency frequency, voice raw with urgency. "This is Captain Rachel Carter. I am carrying a level 4 pathogen. Any strike risks global annihilation. Stand down or humanity ends here." Static swallowed the channel, but for a moment, the missiles faltered. Another crack splintered through the containment case as G-forces tore at it. Webb shouted. Seconds until rupture, Rachel forced the jet lower, diving into canyons where radar struggled and missiles collided against rock. Explosions rolled like thunder, avalanches burying steel fragments as the fighter twisted through hair-thin gaps. Her arms burned, body crushed by gravity, but she refused to yield. Fuel bled away. Systems screamed in protest. Then, through haze and fractured clouds, she saw salvation, the faint runway lights of Thule Air Base. Neutral ground, one last chance. She angled hard, landing gear grinding down. The jet hit the strip at a brutal angle, wheels shrieking, sparks chasing it across ice-slick concrete. The containment case slammed against the bulkhead, a final crack racing its surface like a death sentence. Rachel braked with everything left, the fighter skidding to a halt less than 50 yards from the runway's edge. Hazmat teams in sealed suits rushed forward, pulling the scientists out as Webb thrust the fractured case into waiting arms. It disappeared inside a secondary containment chamber, alarms sealing behind it just as the shell gave way with a metallic snap. Silence swept the runway. The world had hung between annihilation and salvation, measured not in miles but in seconds. Rachel sank against her harness, knowing true command had meant breaking protocol and choosing survival. The courtroom built beneath the Pentagon was a cavern of polished wood and iron discipline, its silence broken only by the rustle of uniforms and the click of reporters' keyboards. Outside, crowds filled the streets with signs that told 2 opposing stories. Some called her a savior. Others painted her as a traitor. Hero and traitor. The division had split the nation. And now Captain Rachel Carter stood alone at the center of judgment. She wore her dress blues, medals aligned in neat rows that glimmered beneath fluorescent lights. They were symbols of her past obedience, now weighed against the crime of defiance. At the judge's bench, a gavel waited. Each time it struck, it echoed like history recording itself. The prosecutor rose first, his voice sharp as steel. He listed the charges: theft of government property, endangering national security, sparking confrontation with Russia, and disobedience of lawful orders. His words painted her as reckless, selfish, and a danger to every American. The silence that followed was suffocating. The defense countered with testimony. Lisa Carter took the stand, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. She described the mercenary assault, the moment the blast doors began to give way, the fear of knowing the pathogen could escape. She told them her sister's disobedience had not been recklessness, but salvation. Dr. Marcus Webb followed, presenting data that confirmed containment would have failed within hours. The court shifted uneasily as he explained how Rachel's intervention had prevented an extinction-level event. Then General Hayes, scarred from decades of service, admitted under oath that Washington had written off Omega-7 as lost, unwilling to risk international fallout. His admission struck like a hammer blow. Still, the prosecutor pressed on. He revealed images of Russian jets on her tail, evidence that her flight had nearly sparked armed conflict. He argued that no individual had the right to make such choices. Nations could not bend to personal loyalty. His voice carried the weight of the system itself, defending order against chaos. Then came the shock. Documents stamped declassified slid across the defense table. Pages detailing weeks of indecision at the Pentagon. Memos that weighed public relations above human lives. The room grew hushed as the truth spread through every row. Rachel had not acted against the system's will. She had acted because the system had chosen inaction. The gavel struck once, steadying the chamber. The judge called for final witness. The doors opened, and the President of the United States entered. Cameras clicked like gunfire as he took the stand. The first sitting president to testify at a court-martial. His voice was calm, but unflinching. He acknowledged systemic failure, admitting that bureaucratic paralysis would have condemned 6 citizens, and perhaps the world, without her disobedience. He did not absolve her crime. He reframed it. When the time came for verdict, the judge did not speak of guilt or innocence. Instead, he offered a choice. Rachel Carter could accept a full pardon, her career quietly retired, or she could accept command of a new unit designed for missions that existed in the space between rules and survival. The words carried the weight of history itself. Rachel's eyes moved to the flags draped above the court, to the medals on her chest, and then to the gavel that waited for its final strike. She knew institutions resisted change, but she also knew that one person could force it. The choice was hers, and the silence of the room bent toward her answer. 6 months after the court-martial, Rachel Carter walked through steel blast doors that hissed shut behind her. Cheyenne Mountain was no longer only a relic of the Cold War. It pulsed with new life, a command center rebuilt for crises that blurred the lines between war and catastrophe. Screens lined the walls, each glowing with maps of shifting threats, earthquakes, terror cells, nuclear signals, and data streams that never paused. The hum of machines mixed with the quiet discipline of the people inside, a rhythm that carried both urgency and control. Rachel wore her uniform with no extra decoration. The weight on her chest came not from medals but from command. Around her, the operators she had chosen assembled. Navy SEALs moved with silent precision, their eyes scanning the room like predators measuring terrain. Army Rangers carried the stance of men who had walked through endless firefights and still stood ready for another. Recon Marines leaned against consoles, confident, restless, dangerous in the way of those who had survived too much. A pair of pilots traded brief glances with CIA officers who kept their expressions hidden, masks honed by years in the shadows. This was Phoenix Division, her creation, her responsibility, her second chance. At the heart of the operations floor, an encrypted feed flickered to life. A briefing officer spoke quickly, but the words slowed. Time itself. A rogue nuclear facility in Eastern Europe had taken American hostages. Intelligence suggested the enemy intended to weaponize the captives as bargaining chips. Perhaps worse. The room stilled, the weight of another impossible mission falling into place. Rachel listened, her face calm, her voice steady as she asked for details. The images on screen showed fortified walls, anti-aircraft batteries, and men carrying rifles with the discipline of soldiers, not bandits. The secure phone on her desk buzzed. She lifted it, the line whispering with encryption before a simple message came through. You have carte blanche. Nothing more, nothing less. Authority without boundaries. trust without leash. She lowered the receiver, her gaze sweeping across the men and women who had chosen to follow her. In their eyes, she saw the same fire that had carried her through the Arctic storm. She spoke without raising her voice. "Gear up. We're going to steal some Americans back." The words carried through the command floor like a fuse being lit. SEALs checked weapons, Rangers tightened straps, pilots murmured about flight plans. CIA agents exchanged encrypted drives. The energy was not chaotic but disciplined, restrained triumph channeled into movement. Above the central console, the new insignia of the division glowed, a phoenix rising from fire, wings outstretched, reborn from ashes. Rachel studied it for a moment. The symbol was more than decoration. It was the truth of what they were. She had fallen, been branded traitor, and now stood again with command of something forged in that fire. The operations floor came alive, yet Rachel felt the quiet core of it all. The impossible was no longer a boundary. It was the mission itself, and Phoenix Division was ready to meet it. The encrypted order was stamped with a single phrase, Operation Lazarus. The meaning was clear. Life pulled back from the brink. A mission that should have been impossible. Rachel Carter strapped into Ghost Rider, the hypersonic stealth fighter that would carry her team into the heart of Kazakhstan. Engines rumbled like caged thunder before catapulting her forward, pressing her against the seat as the craft pierced the sky at Mach speeds. The HUD blurred as terrain screamed past beneath her. The canyon walls rose sharp and jagged, snow whipping in their wake as she flew so low the ground radar barely distinguished steel from stone. Terrain masking was her shield, precision, her only survival. One mistake at this speed meant impact and fire. Behind her, two wingmen fanned out, their roles clear. They would strike first, silent and ruthless, opening the path. Radar lit. SAM sights powered up across the ridgeline. The facility roused like a waking beast. Her wingmen answered with surgical fire. Missiles streaked, finding targets with violent blossoms of orange against the night. Communications arrays cracked apart, collapsing into sparks. Enemy radars blinked out, one by one, until silence replaced their sweeping arcs. Ghost Rider slid through the gap, undetected, unstoppable. Inside the cockpit, Rachel felt the weight of her team in every movement. The Phoenix operators waited in the belly of a companion craft, strapped into their gear. She could picture them, hands clenched around fast ropes, hearts steady with training. Their survival depended on her threading this canyon without a second's hesitation. The clock ticked in her helmet, a reminder that hostages inside the nuclear facility had hours, not days. The final canyon opened into the valley. Concrete walls rose ahead, bristling with gun emplacements. Rachel banked hard, the jet carving air as she dropped ordnance with pinpoint timing. Explosions tore defensive turrets apart, smoke folding into the night. A second pass left the rooftop clear. Then the Phoenix operators dropped into the storm. Fast ropes unfurled, boots hit steel, and the team spread with machine precision. Through the open comms, Rachel heard clipped voices. Hostages located. Resistance heavy. Breach imminent. She circled above. Ghost Rider her weapon and her shield. Enemy reinforcements spilled from trucks. Rifles raised. But she struck before they could form a line. Cannon fire tore through engines. Explosions scattering the fighters. Her strikes were sharp, never wasteful. Each one carving space for her team to move deeper. Minutes stretched into eternity, the mission balanced on the edge of success and collapse. Then the call came, hostages secured. Extraction. Inbound. Rachel exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours, her focus easing only enough to see the facility below, scarred but subdued. Operation Lazarus had pulled life back from the brink. Discipline, trust, and daring had aligned. The impossible had not broken them. It had defined them. Ghost Rider's engine screamed as Rachel Carter forced it into a maneuver no pilot should have attempted. She cut thrust, shifted vector, and dropped the fighter vertically through the fractured roof of the Kazakhstan facility. Concrete dust blasted upward as the jet settled onto steel supports, its frame groaning in protest. The instant it steadied, she ejected canopy locks and leapt down, sidearm drawn, sprinting into the corridors with the countdown echoing through her headset. The hostages were already secured outside, but the heart of the complex still pulsed with danger. Sirens wailed, red lights flashing along narrow halls that reeked of burnt circuitry. Her boots hammered against metal as she ran, eyes scanning corners, fingers steady against the trigger. The sound that dominated everything was the countdown, broadcast in a mechanical voice. 2 minutes. Then 1:59. Time was not just a measure now. It was an executioner drawing closer with each breath. Rachel burst into the central chamber and froze for half a heartbeat. The device stood taller than her, wires snaking into consoles, digital numbers bleeding seconds away. 1:54, 1:53. The weight of annihilation pressed against her chest. For a moment, the enormity threatened to paralyze. But training took hold. The old muscle memory from courses she had once dismissed as theoretical. She holstered her sidearm and dropped to her knees at the panel, tracing conduits with her gloved hands. Her breath rasped in her helmet. 1:20. She followed the power line, remembering the lectures every device had a manual override, hidden not for safety but for engineers who refused to trust machines completely. 1:12. Fingers found a recessed switch beneath a shielded plate, its paint corroded with years of neglect. She flipped it open, sweat freezing on her neck despite the heat. 30 seconds. Wires hummed under her palms, the panel vibrating with restrained fury. 25. She pulled the lever, resistance stiff, as if the machine itself resisted salvation. 15. It gave with a snap, the sound lost under the siren. The countdown stuttered. 10. 9. The numbers froze at 7, then bled away into 0 without detonation. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel leaned back, lungs heaving, as the red lights dimmed to black. Time had been executioner and savior, and her faith in training had carried her through the impossible. Humanity had come within 7 seconds of ending, and she had chosen courage instead of fear. 6 months later, Cheyenne Mountain breathed with new life. The command center pulsed with intelligence feeds, global threat screens, and the steady rhythm of operators who knew their work would never be seen by the public. Phoenix Division had become more than an experiment. It was a machine forged out of necessity, silent and relentless. Rachel Carter stood at its center, now wearing the insignia of Major. Her presence carried no theatrics, only the quiet authority of someone who had already stood against annihilation and refused to break. The encrypted mission tablet lay on the desk before her, its screen alive with fresh coordinates. Another impossible crisis, another moment where protocol had failed and humanity's survival demanded more than obedience. The words were simple, but the implication, vast. A threat, abroad. A fracture that could not wait. She touched the tablet once, the glow reflected in her eyes, and closed it with deliberate calm. Her gaze drifted to the Phoenix insignia mounted above the operations floor. The emblem gleamed under fluorescent lights, a reminder of what had been born from ashes. She remembered the courtroom's silence, the gavel striking as if it had been the voice of history itself. She remembered Lisa's testimony, the fear and strength woven into her sister's words. Most of all, she remembered the moment when she chose to defy orders, the act that defined everything since. Around her, the unit moved with quiet precision. SEALs checked their weapons, Rangers plotted infiltration routes, pilots reviewed fuel lines, CIA operatives scrolled through encrypted comms. There was no chatter, no bravado, only synergy honed through trust. They were professionals carrying the burden of missions others could not even acknowledge. She watched them and felt the weight settle across her shoulders again, heavier than metals, sharper than any verdict. The secure phone buzzed once, the sound almost lost under the hum of machinery. She lifted it, heard the line crackle with encryption, and listened to the only words she needed. Phoenix Division was being deployed. Rachel set the phone down, straightened her uniform, and spoke to her team. "Gear up. We're moving out." The command was calm, but the undertone was steel. The cycle would begin again, rebirth through fire, rising from ashes, carrying the impossible into tomorrow.